Daelin Voss clung to the jagged rock, his small fingers trembling against its cold, unyielding surface. The air around him was thick with acrid smoke, and the stench of burning metal and flesh clawed at his throat. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. Below, the streets of Oranus Prime were a sea of chaos. Buildings crumbled like fragile sand castles, their skeletal remains glowing orange from the relentless bombardment above. The ground quaked with each distant explosion, a cruel heartbeat counting down to the massacre's end. Through the smoke, Daelin glimpsed the source of the destruction: massive Empire warships hovering like vultures, their underbellies spewing flames and plasma. His ears rang with the screams of the dying, a symphony of despair that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. Yet amidst the cacophony, a single voice broke through. "Daelin!" His mother's cry was sharp and desperate, piercing the chaos like a knife. "Stay hidden! Don't let them see you!" Her voice was swallowed almost immediately by the deafening roar of collapsing debris. Daelin's small chest heaved as tears streaked his soot-covered face. He dared not call out to her, dared not risk being heard. He pressed himself deeper into the crevice, the jagged edges biting into his skin. Blood trickled down his arm, but the pain felt distant, muted by the terror gripping him. The shadow of a war droid passed over his hiding spot, its mechanical joints hissing and grinding as it scanned the ruins with cold efficiency. Its searchlight swept across the rubble like a predator's gaze, stopping briefly near Daelin's hiding spot. The boy's breath hitched, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The light moved on. When the droid's metallic steps faded, Daelin allowed himself to exhale, but relief was fleeting. The cries around him began to dwindle, not because the chaos had subsided, but because there were fewer voices left to scream. He stayed hidden for hours. Or was it days? Time had lost meaning. When the silence finally descended, it wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, heavy with the weight of annihilation. Daelin crawled out of his crevice, his limbs stiff and shaking. The world he emerged into was unrecognizable. The once thriving streets of Oranus Prime were now a graveyard, littered with charred bodies and twisted metal. The faint smell of flowers from the market stalls had been replaced by the pungent reek of ash and death. Daelin stumbled forward, his bare feet scraping against shards of glass and rubble. He saw no one, not a single survivor, until he reached the plaza. There, amidst the ruins, lay his mother. Her once vibrant face was pale, her lifeless eyes staring up at the darkened sky. Daelin fell to his knees beside her, his small hands shaking as he reached for her. Her fingers were still warm, but her chest was still. "I'll make them pay," he whispered, his voice raw. It was a promise, carved into his soul as deeply as the scars that now marked his body. Years later, the galaxy knew a different Daelin Voss. He stood in the shadows of a dimly lit chamber, the weight of his past hidden behind sharp eyes and a carefully neutral expression. The room buzzed with tension as members of humanity's clandestine council debated the future. Holographic maps and data streams flickered in the air around them, casting ghostly light on their weary faces. "Retaliation would be suicide," said General Lasker, his voice hard but tinged with resignation. "The Empire has crushed every rebellion it's faced. We're a single planet. We'd be erased before we made a dent." "And what's the alternative?" Daelin stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Silence? Compliance? Allowing them to snuff out another 800,000 lives? Or 8 million next time?" Lasker's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The room fell silent, all eyes on Daelin. "You all know me," Daelin continued, his voice steady but laced with steel. "You know what I've survived, what we've all endured. The Empire doesn't just conquer, it annihilates. And as long as we hide, they'll continue to see us as prey. But prey can bite back." His words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. He paced slowly, his boots echoing against the polished floor. "I'm not suggesting a head-on war," he said. "I'm suggesting strategy, diplomacy, subterfuge. We don't need to fight like them. We need to fight smarter." He tapped a console, and a new hologram appeared, a sprawling map of the Empire's territories, dotted with potential weak points, supply chains, communications hubs, systems with rebellious factions. They've overextended, Daelin explained. Their reach exceeds their grasp. We exploit that. We forge alliances with those they've oppressed. We dismantle them from the inside, one piece at a time, and when they're vulnerable, we strike. The council murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement. Lasker crossed his arms but didn't argue further. "You'll need a team," said Ril Sierra, a shrewd woman with piercing green eyes. Her tone was measured but held a note of approval. "A small one, elite. This isn't just about strategy, it's about precision." "I've already started assembling one," Daelin replied. The team met for the first time in a nondescript bunker on the outskirts of Earth's last city. The air inside was stale, heavy with the faint scent of oil and machinery. Daelin stood at the center of the room, flanked by holographic displays of mission objectives. Tarek Lane leaned against a wall, his arms crossed and a cocky grin tugging at his lips. "So, this is the rebellion's big plan? A ragtag group of misfits against an empire? Sounds like a bad holodrama." "You signed up?" Daelin said without missing a beat. Tarek shrugged. "Fair point." Kirak Valen, a towering alien with skin like obsidian and eyes that gleamed like molten gold, spoke next. His voice was deep, resonating with quiet authority. "I don't care about your revenge. My people suffer under the Empire's yoke. If this plan frees them, I'll fight." Ril stepped forward, her gaze sharp as a blade. "We don't need promises, we need results. Are you ready to deliver?" Daelin met her gaze, unflinching. "We start tomorrow." As the team dispersed to prepare, Daelin lingered in the bunker, staring at the map. His fingers traced the glowing lines of the Empire's territories, his mind racing with possibilities. The ghosts of Oranus Prime whispered to him, their voices a reminder of why he couldn't fail. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. The Empire would fall, one way or another. The room hummed with low energy as Daelin Voss stared at the holographic projection hovering above the table. A model of the Empire's communications hub spun slowly, its sleek spires bristling with sensors and defense turrets. The hologram cast faint blue light across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the unyielding determination in his eyes. Ril Sierra broke the silence. "This isn't just a hub, it's a fortress. If we're even slightly off, we won't make it out." Her tone was crisp, each word calculated, but there was no mistaking the tension coiling beneath her measured demeanor. Daelin nodded, his gaze never leaving the spinning model. "That's why we don't miss." Tarek Lane let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair with the easy arrogance of someone who thrived in chaos. "No pressure, right? Just infiltrate one of the most secure locations in the galaxy and walk out with a smile. Simple." "It's not about walking out with a smile," Correct Valen rumbled, his deep voice resonating like distant thunder. "It's about walking out alive." Daelin turned toward his team, the hologram flickering behind him. "This isn't a mission for glory. It's about creating cracks. The Empire's communication network isn't just their backbone. It's their grip on the galaxy. Disrupt it, and we weaken their control over everything." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words settling over them. "How are we getting in?" Ril asked, breaking the silence. Daelin tapped the console, zooming in on a narrow access corridor running beneath the hub. "Supply routes. Their sensors won't register organic life among their automated shipments. We'll move in during the loading cycle, plant the devices, and get out before anyone realizes we're there." "And the turrets?" Tarek asked, raising an eyebrow. "Disabled remotely," Daelin replied, his voice steady. "Kieran's already working on it." Tarek snorted. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds like a walk in the park." "It won't be," Daelin said sharply, cutting through the humor. "The moment we step inside, we're on borrowed time. Every second counts." The shuttle's engines purred softly as it slipped through the void, its hull coated with a stealth material that made it nearly invisible against the endless expanse of stars. Inside, the team moved with quiet efficiency, each preparing for what lay ahead. Ril checked her equipment with meticulous care, the faint clicks and snaps of her rifle's components breaking the silence. Tarek fiddled with a compact data spike, his movements precise despite the casual smirk he wore like armor. Kirek sat in a corner, his massive frame nearly dwarfing the space, his hands resting on his knees as he stared ahead with a calm intensity. Daelin stood near the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of the communications hub. The massive structure loomed like a jagged crown against the stars, its lights pulsing rhythmically as if it were alive. "You're quiet," Rill said, stepping up beside him. "Thinking," Daelin replied without looking away. "About the plan or the risk?" "Both." She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes searching his face. "You've been carrying this weight for a long time, Daelin. You don't have to do it alone." He finally turned to her, his expression softening for the briefest moment. "I appreciate that. But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone we've lost, everyone who can't fight back." Rill nodded, her respect for him deepening. "Then let's make it count." The supply corridor was colder than Daelin had anticipated, the faint hum of machinery vibrating through the metal floor beneath his boots. The team moved in silence, their breaths visible in the frosty air. The corridor smelled faintly of oil and ozone, the scent mingling with the distant hiss of hydraulics. Tarek held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "We're at the first checkpoint," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical hum. Daelin crouched beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the control panel embedded in the wall. "Can you bypass it?" Tarek grinned, pulling the data spike from his belt. "Do you even have to ask?" As Tarek worked, the rest of the team kept watch. Rill's finger hovered over the trigger of her rifle, her gaze darting between the shadows. Kirek stood near the rear, his imposing presence a silent warning to any would-be attackers. The door hissed open, and Tarek turned with a flourish. "After you." The next chamber was vast and dimly lit, its walls lined with glowing conduits that pulsed with energy. The air was warmer here, tinged with the faint metallic tang of electricity. Daelin gestured for the team to move quickly, his pulse quickening as they approached their target. The hub's central core was a towering pillar of light and machinery, its surface alive with shifting patterns of data. The hum of energy was almost deafening here, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. "Rill, the charges," Daelin said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. She moved with practiced efficiency, securing the small explosives to the core's base. Each beep of the timer felt like a countdown to their survival. 3 minutes, Rill said, stepping back. The sudden blare of alarms shattered the quiet, the red glow of emergency lights flooding the chamber. "We've been made," Kyrek growled, his hand tightening around his weapon. "Move!" Daelin barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team sprinted back toward the corridor, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls. Behind them, the sound of mechanical footsteps grew louder, war droids closing in. Tarek skidded to a halt, turning to face the approaching droids. "Go! I'll slow them down!" "No," Daelin said firmly, grabbing his arm. "We stick together." Rill fired a burst of plasma rounds at the nearest droid, the sharp crack of her rifle reverberating through the corridor. Sparks flew as the droid collapsed, but more were coming. "Tarek, get that door open!" Daelin ordered. Tarek moved with urgency, his fingers flying over the control panel. The door hissed open just as the droids closed in, their red optics glowing menacingly. Kyrek fired a shot that sent one droid crashing into the wall, buying them precious seconds. The team slipped through the door, sealing it behind them. Daelin set a secondary charge on the control panel, ensuring they couldn't be followed. The shuttle was waiting when they emerged, its engines humming with readiness. They scrambled aboard, the ramp closing just as the first explosion rocked the hub. Inside, the team collapsed into their seats, their chests heaving with exertion. The shuttle lifted off, the glow of the detonations illuminating the dark void. Daelin sat in silence, his fists clenched as he stared out the viewport. The hub was gone, but the battle was far from over. "We did it," Rill said, her voice laced with exhaustion. Daelin's gaze hardened. This was just the beginning. The shuttle's descent into the shadowed valleys of Raycon 3 was unnervingly silent, the engines muffled by the dense atmosphere. Raycon, a barren wasteland with crimson cliffs and ash-strewn plains, offered little in the way of comfort. Its air reeked of sulfur and damp metal, each breath an unpleasant reminder of the toxic environment outside. Yet it was here that Daelin Voss sought the first key to uniting the galaxy, a meeting with the Merle, a species crushed under the Empire's heel for generations. Inside the shuttle, the air was taut with unease. The mission had been a calculated risk, yet the aftershocks of the communications hub's destruction had spread quicker than anticipated. Daelin stood at the viewport, his sharp gaze scanning the alien terrain below. The muted orange glow of Raycon's surface reflected in his eyes, the memories of his own devastated home flickering in the depths of his mind. "Are we sure they'll show?" Tarek Lane leaned back in his chair, his boots propped against the console. His voice carried its usual bravado, but the slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his unease. "They'll come," Ril Sayera said from her position near the weapons locker. She was meticulously calibrating her rifle, the faint hum of its power cell filling the silence. "The Merle don't have many options left." Kirek Valen, ever the sentinel, stood near the rear of the cabin, his imposing frame casting long shadows in the dim light. "Options or not, they're desperate. Desperate allies are unpredictable." "They're more than desperate," Daelin said, his tone quiet yet resolute. "They're angry, and anger can be useful if guided correctly." The shuttle touched down with a gentle jolt, the landing gear sinking slightly into the ashen ground. The ramp lowered with a hiss, releasing a wave of stale air that carried the sharp tang of burnt minerals. The team descended cautiously, their boots crunching against the brittle terrain. Ahead of them, the canyon walls loomed like jagged teeth, their surfaces etched with strange, luminescent markings. Daelin's sharp eyes scanned the shadows for movement. The Merle were known for their elusive nature, their ability to blend seamlessly into their surroundings, a trait that had kept them alive under the Empire's brutal rule. "Daelin Voss." The voice emerged from the shadows, low and resonant, carrying an otherworldly cadence. A figure stepped forward, its form draped in flowing, tattered robes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The Merle emissary's face was obscured by a hood, but the faint glow of iridescent eyes pierced through the darkness. "You're late," the emissary said, the faint echo of their voice adding an ethereal quality to their presence. "We weren't exactly flying in friendly skies," Daelin replied, his voice steady but cautious. The emissary studied him for a long moment before gesturing for the team to follow. "Come, we don't have much time." The Merle led them deeper into the canyon, the air growing colder with each step. The glowing markings on the walls began to shift and ripple, as though alive, casting strange patterns of light that danced across the team's faces. "What are those?" Tarek whispered, his usual bravado tempered by genuine curiosity. "The memories of our people," the emissary replied without turning, "encoded in the stone, preserved against the Empire's attempts to erase us." Daelin's gaze lingered on the shifting patterns, the weight of the Miral's loss settling heavily on his chest. "You've held on to your history," he said quietly. "That's more than most can say under the Empire." "It's all we have left," the emissary said, their voice tinged with bitterness. They emerged into a vast cavern, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. The space was filled with Miral, dozens of them, their glowing eyes and faintly luminescent skin casting an otherworldly light. The air was thick with a strange floral scent that seemed out of place in the harsh environment. The emissary raised a hand and the gathered Miral fell silent. "This is Daelin Voss," they announced. "He claims to offer freedom in exchange for unity." Daelin stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't claim anything. What I offer is a chance, an opportunity to stand against the Empire, to take back what they've stolen from you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "And what happens when we fail?" A voice from the crowd, sharp and accusatory. A younger Miral stepped forward, their luminous eyes blazing with defiance. "The Empire crushes rebellion. They've crushed us before. What makes you different?" Daelin met their gaze unflinching. Because I've lived through it, he said. I've seen what they do to those who resist. I've seen what happens when we let them divide us, keep us weak. The only way we survive is together. The younger Muriel hesitated, their defiance wavering under Daelin's conviction. Rill stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. This isn't just about survival. It's about revenge. Every one of us has lost something to the Empire. This is your chance to take it back. The cavern grew quiet, the weight of her words settling over the gathered Muriel. The emissary turned to Daelin, their glowing eyes unreadable. We will consider your offer, they said. But know this. If you betray us, we will not hesitate to destroy you. Understood, Daelin said. But I'm not here to betray anyone. I'm here to destroy the Empire. As the team left the cavern, the weight of the encounter lingered. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crunch of ash underfoot. That went better than I expected, Tarek said finally, his tone light but forced. They're still hesitant, Rill said, and they have every right to be. If this goes wrong, it's their lives on the line. It won't go wrong, Daelin said, his voice firm. Kirek glanced at him, his golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. You speak with certainty, but certainty doesn't guarantee success. No, Daelin admitted, but it gives people hope, and hope is what we need right now. As they reached the shuttle, a faint tremor rippled through the ground. The team froze, their eyes scanning the horizon. Earthquake? Tarek asked, though his voice lacked conviction. Rill shook her head, her grip tightening on her rifle. That wasn't natural. Daelin's gaze sharpened, his instincts on high alert. Let's move, now. The shuttle's engines roared to life as they ascended into the dark sky. Below, the canyon seemed to writhe, the glowing markings flickering erratically. Daelin couldn't shake the feeling that they had just scratched the surface of something far larger than they realized. As the shuttle disappeared into the void, the shadows of Raycon III stirred, their secrets waiting to be uncovered. The shuttle glided into the hidden docking bay, aboard the Dawnfire, the flagship of humanity's growing resistance fleet. The bay was a cavernous expanse of steel and shadows, lit only by the faint glow of navigation lights and the hum of repair drones darting between ships. The sharp scent of engine oil mingled with the tang of ozone, a constant reminder of the war simmering just beyond the walls. Daelin Voss descended the shuttle ramp, his boots hitting the deck with a deliberate thud. He carried himself with purpose, his sharp gaze scanning the bustling bay as engineers and pilots worked tirelessly to prepare for the next move. Rill and Tarek flanked him, their expressions mirroring the quiet intensity in the room. Kirek remained a step behind, his massive frame a silent but commanding presence. As they stepped into the command center, a low hum of conversation quieted. The space was dominated by a massive circular table, its surface alive with holographic projections of the galaxy. The map pulsed faintly, displaying key Empire installations, supply routes, and newly liberated systems. Around the table, the Resistance's leaders waited, their faces etched with exhaustion but lit with a spark of determination. General Varen, a grizzled veteran with a scar cutting across his cheek, stepped forward. You've stirred the nest, Voss, he said, his voice gravelly but carrying a note of respect. The Empire's already begun redirecting forces to their border systems. Good, Daelin replied, his voice sharp as steel. The more they spread themselves thin, the better. He turned to the hologram, his fingers brushing against the glowing lines of the Empire's network. We have their attention. Now we make them regret it. Rill stepped forward, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The map shifted, zooming in on a key sector where the Empire's forces clustered like a coiled serpent. The Muriel intelligence was clear, she began. The Empire's developing a new weapon, a failsafe against rebellion. It's housed here. A structure materialized in the hologram, a sprawling facility nestled on a barren moon. Its defenses were formidable, with concentric rings of automated turrets, shield generators, and patrolling ships. Tarek let out a low whistle. That's a fortress, not a facility. Daelin's jaw tightened. And if we don't take it out, it won't matter how many allies we have. They'll turn that weapon on every liberated system, and the rebellion will die before it begins. Kyrek's deep voice rumbled from behind them. You have a plan. I do. Daelin's eyes burned with resolve as he stepped closer to the map. We hit them on 2 fronts. The first team infiltrates the facility, disables their shields, and plants charges on the power core. The second team engages their fleet to draw attention away from the ground assault. General Varen crossed his arms. It's ambitious. But those defenses won't go down quietly. What's our distraction? Rill smirked, her fingers pulling up a schematic of an old Empire frigate retrofitted with explosives. We give them a gift, a ship loaded with enough firepower to make them think it's the main assault. While they're focused on neutralizing it, we move in. Timed perfectly, Daelin added. If we succeed, the Empire loses not just a weapon, but the morale of their fleet. And if we fail, Varan pressed. Daelin's gaze was unwavering. Then we take as many of them with us as we can. The days leading up to the assault were a flurry of preparation. In the hangar, engineers worked around the clock, outfitting ships with upgraded shielding and faster engines. The air was thick with the sound of welding torches and the acrid smell of molten metal. Daelin moved through the chaos, his presence a steady anchor for the crew. He inspected the retrofitted frigate, its hull reinforced and packed with enough explosives to light up a small moon. Rill met him near the loading ramp, her face streaked with grease, but her eyes sharp. It's ready, she said. Timers synced, systems primed. Once we set it loose, there's no pulling it back. Daelin nodded. Good. Make sure it counts. Nearby, Tarek and Karek were sparring in a corner of the hangar, their movements a blur of precision and power. Despite his smaller frame, Tarek held his ground against the massive alien, ducking and weaving with practiced ease. Don't go easy on me, big guy, Tarek said, grinning as he narrowly avoided a crushing blow. Kyrek's golden eyes gleamed with amusement. You're fast, but speed won't save you in a real fight. It will if they can't catch me, Daelin's voice cut through their banter. Save it for the mission. Both men straightened, their expressions sobering. Tarek gave a mock salute. Yes, sir. The assault began under the cover of darkness, the fleet emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. The retrofitted frigate led the charge, its engines blazing as it hurtled toward the Empire's defenses. Alarms blared across the enemy fleet as the frigate's proximity triggered automated responses. Daelin watched from the cockpit of the Dawnfire, his sharp eyes tracking every movement on the display. Hold position, he ordered. Let them take the bait. The Empire's fleet scrambled, redirecting firepower toward the frigate. The distraction worked, drawing attention away from the ground team as they descended onto the moon's surface. Rill led the infiltration team, her sharp commands cutting through the comms as they moved through the facility's labyrinthine corridors. The air was thick with the sterile scent of recycled oxygen, the faint hum of machinery vibrating beneath their feet. Shields are ahead, she said, gesturing toward a massive control panel embedded in the wall. Cover me. Tarek and Kyrek took defensive positions, their weapons trained on the corridors behind them. The sharp crack of plasma fire echoed through the air as Empire guards engaged, their uniforms a blur of black and red. Almost there, Rill muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. Hurry up! Tarek shouted, firing another shot that sent a guard sprawling. The hum of the shields faltered, then died, replaced by the shrill wail of alarms. Shields down, Rill confirmed, slamming the final command into the console. Fall back, Daelin ordered over the comms. Charges in place? Planted and ready, Rill replied. As the team fought their way back to the extraction point, the retrofitted frigate detonated, a brilliant explosion that lit up the void. The shockwave rippled through the Empire's fleet, throwing their formation into chaos. On the moon's surface, the ground trembled as the facility's power core detonated, a fiery plume erupting into the sky. The Dawnfire swooped in, its engines roaring as it collected the team. As the ship ascended, Daelin stood at the viewport, watching the flames consume the facility. His fists clenched, but his voice was steady. One step closer, he murmured. one step closer to breaking them. The Dawnfire hung in the vast expanse of space, its hull reflecting the eerie glow of the burning Empire facility below. Daelin Voss stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed on the distant chaos. The flames licked at the darkness, casting fleeting shadows on his sharp features. Around him the bridge hummed with controlled urgency as the crew coordinated their next move. The air was charged with a sense of purpose, heavy but electric, like the seconds before a storm. "The fleet is holding formation," General Varen's voice crackled through the comms. "They're rallying. Whatever you're planning, it's now or never." Daelin turned to Ril Syra, her face streaked with soot but her eyes steady and sharp. "Are the charges synchronized across the fleet?" She nodded. "Ready to detonate on your command." Tarek Lane leaned against the console, his usual smirk replaced by something colder, sharper. "They're going to throw everything they have at us the second they realize what's happening." "Let them," Daelin said, his voice low but resolute. "This isn't just about destroying a weapon. It's about showing them we're not afraid, that no matter how many times they knock us down, we'll rise stronger." Kirek Valen, his golden eyes glinting in the dim light, stepped forward. "And if they overwhelm us?" "They won't," Daelin replied, his gaze unflinching. "Because they underestimate us. They always have." The holographic map flickered to life, displaying the Empire's fleet in grim detail. Their formation was tightening, a defensive stance that bristled with power, but Daelin saw the cracks, the vulnerabilities hidden within their rigid structure. "Focus fire on their command ship," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Take out their leadership, and the rest will crumble." As the orders rippled through the fleet, the Dawnfire surged forward, leading the charge. The engines roared like a beast unleashed, propelling them toward the heart of the enemy lines. Around them, Allied ships followed, their weapons blazing trails of light across the void. The first impact came like a hammer, a blinding flash as the Empire's forward turrets opened fire. The bridge shook, alarms wailing as shields absorbed the brunt of the assault. "Shields holding at 70%, Ril reported, her hands flying over the controls. "Keep pushing," Daelin said, his voice calm despite the chaos. The Dawnfire weaved through the barrage, its turrets spitting retaliatory fire that struck true. Explosions bloomed across the Empire's ranks, brilliant bursts of light that sent debris spinning into the void. Each hit felt like a small victory, a step closer to the endgame. On the surface of the moon below, the last remnants of the Empire's facility crumbled, its defenses reduced to smoldering ruins. The charges planted by the infiltration team had done their job, severing the Empire's grip on the system. But Daelin knew the real battle was still ahead. "Enemy reinforcements inbound," Tarek said, his tone tight. "They're not letting this go without a fight." "They won't have a choice," Daelin replied, his gaze narrowing. "Ril, initiate the final phase." She hesitated for a heartbeat, her fingers hovering over the console. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." "There never was," Daelin said. Ril's hand slammed down on the control panel, and across the fleet, a synchronized ripple of detonations erupted. Empire ships shuddered and split apart as the charges placed within their supply lines ignited. The void was filled with fire and chaos, the Empire's formation fracturing under the unexpected blow. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Daelin remained still, his focus unbroken. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cutting through the celebration. "Target their flagship. End this now." The Dawnfire surged ahead, its weapons locking onto the Empire's command ship. The massive vessel loomed like a titan, its dark hull bristling with weapons and defenses. But even titans could fall. "Concentrate fire," Daelin ordered, his voice rising with intensity. "Don't let up." The bridge shook violently as the Dawnfire took a direct hit, sparks flying from the consoles. Tarek cursed under his breath, gripping the edge of the console to steady himself. "Shields down to 30%, Ril called out, her voice strained. "Hold steady," Daelin said. "We're almost there." The final barrage was a symphony of destruction, the Dawnfire's cannons unleashing a relentless assault on the command ship. The enemy vessel groaned under the onslaught, its hull buckling and splitting as explosions tore through its structure. On the bridge of the Dawnfire, Silence fell as the command ship finally succumbed, its massive form collapsing into itself in a blinding explosion. The light faded, leaving only debris and the faint glow of distant stars. Daelin exhaled slowly, his hands unclenching from the console. Around him the crew erupted into cheers, the tension breaking like a dam. "We did it," Tarek said, his grin returning. "Not just us," Daelin replied, his voice quiet but filled with a fierce pride. "All of us." Kirek stepped forward, his golden eyes meeting Daelin's. "The galaxy will remember this day, not just as a victory, but as the beginning of something greater." Daelin nodded, his gaze distant. "It's not just about defeating the Empire. It's about proving that we can stand together, that no matter how much they try to break us, we'll rise stronger." He turned to the viewport, the burning remnants of the Empire's fleet reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, the faces of those he'd lost flickered in his mind. His mother, his people, the countless lives stolen by the Empire's cruelty. "This isn't just for us," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "It's for everyone who's ever been silenced, for every world that's suffered under their rule. Today, we show them what humanity is capable of." As the dawnfire drifted through the wreckage, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in decades, the Empire's grip had faltered, and in its place, a new hope began to rise. Daelin Voss stood at the forefront, his resolve unbroken, his vision clear. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had spoken, and its voice would not be silenced.